Hello all, this is the recent haul of reasonably priced tools that Banggood kindly sent to me to review. In the last review video, I looked at this dowel maker and this sort of multi-function saddle square. I'll make sure that pops up at the end if you're interested in looking at either of those. In this one, I'll be looking at this large 16-inch triangular 45 and 90 degree square and this dial indicator set with various mounting options. I discovered something you need to be aware of if you're interested in one of these, so keep watching. I'll look at the dial indicator first, and here's the one I got in parts as it came out of the box. Before we get into it, in case you're new to them, what is a dial gauge? Well, the gauge itself is a needle pointer that rotates around a face in either direction, corresponding to whether the spindle is depressed or extended. You can get indicators with imperial or metric scales, and I have the metric. So one whole rotation of the long pointer is 1mm of stem movement. The finer increment scales in between are for tenths and hundredths of a millimetre. On some, like mine, there's a short pointer whose scale indicates whole revolutions of the long pointer, allowing you to track multi-millimetre movements. Mine has a little thumb screw locking clamp which, when loosened, allows you to turn the face to zero it to the pointer. In terms of woodworking, if you've seen one of these, it's usually when someone is setting up a table saw. There's a couple of others on Banggood whose mounts are designed for just that, as you can see, with nice and easy adjustment from slot to blade via a thumb screw. They have quite short throws though, and my table saw, due to the motor being on the wrong side, needed a longer mount, hence why I chose this one. It is though also available as the short version. Another thing I like the look of with this gauge is its mount offered up configurations for different tasks, like checking planar on planar thicknesser beds. The bar for the table saw mitre slots is a standard 19mm affair and features two sprung bearing grub screws for perfect fitting in the slot. The black top thumb screws you can see there are levelers, so you can flush the bar to the tabletop. The bar has a shallow housing to seat the main mounting bar, which has a series of position holes and a rounded cutaway end for mounting the gauge. You can also attach the mitre bar to this, giving you an upright mounting for planar beds. Whichever way you assemble, it's done with the supplied M5 Allen screws, and an Allen key for those is provided. In this upright position then, the gauge screws into the shallow housing in what is usually the mitre bar, and here I've noticed a bit of a problem. Look at that, something like a 6mm gap between the gauge head and bench top. That's not going to tell me much about the planar beds now, is it? I had no idea this would be an issue when I ordered it. Why would I? It should at least do as bloody advertised. Going back on Banggood, I noticed there is a full kit version of mine with adapters featuring a whole set of differing length and type of gauge head. They do also offer a set of gauge heads on their own, which I may end up getting, but it appears the bundle set is better value. There it is on the planer just to demonstrate, and you can see the gauge head is well above the infeed table. I could just call it chocolate fireguard mode, or I could do my usual and make good with what I've got. So I've got the bar here, thumb screws removed, and I'm going to drill and tap a hole just down from the centre. Scratch marked with an awl, 4.2mm drill bit, M5 tap, bosh. That'll do nicely. I have some travel up and down from the base now. Miraculously, my bed zeroed out. It appears both outfeed and infeed tables, at the cutter mouth at least, are within 1/100th of a millimetre in planar. With all the adjustments I've made and the use it's had, that's incredible. So what will it tell me about my table saw then? Well, first, as someone kicked off in the comments about my setting up my mitre fence off my blade, let me talk about my table saw a sec. It's one I made, and it's based around this beast of a Mafell KSP 85 saw. Over 20 years old this is now, and has a lifting mech I made for it, made from Ali profile. You can see the motor sticks out the opposite side to normal, on your left as you feed in. The two blades I have for it are a 24 tooth Mafell ripping blade and a Hilti 48 tooth for crosscut. Both from the days when Mafell all but built Hilti saws for them, or so word has it. Both obsolete now, but a few sellers still have them, and they cost just over £100 each. So they're premium blades, and unlike some blades with coatings or even raised centres, these are flat, like dead flat. The circular saw under the table is fixed in place. There's no adjustment like on a standard table saw. Instead, I align everything to the blades, the mitre slot, the fence, all that. So yeah, in my case, it's fine for me to reference off the blade. I get though that as a YouTuber I generally ought to state why I'm fine to reference off the blade, but with a conventional table saw you ought to reference everything off the mitre slot. Right, all that said, I am looking forward to checking how well everything is set with the gauge and if it needs adjustment, and I'm adjusting the grubs for good fit in the slot, then levelling out with the thumb screws. I've no intention of this being a how-to table saw tune-up, as there are, at last count, over 450 million such videos, mostly from American YouTubers, on just that. But in just trying to test the gauge out, you'll sort of get the idea. Happy with the gauge and mount position, no issues with the gauge head reaching in this orientation, I mark a little X on the blade at the rear, then try and exactly centre it on the gauge head. I then loosen the locking thumb screw clamp on the gauge and turn the dial so it zeroes on the pointer, then lock it back down. They're really sensitive, these, and I find sometimes, at least with this one, it's worth a slight rock back and forth so it can sort of find its equilibrium. All set, you can move the gauge to the front of the blade, then turn the blade itself so your mark, again, is exactly centre of the gauge head, and then back again for good measure. I did this in 3 different spots around the blade circumference and struggled to read any more than 2/100ths of a millimetre difference, so you can be damn sure I'm not touching the setup. This is woodworking, not engineering, remember. Here I've moved the fence so it's just kissing the blade. Happy that the blade and slot are parallel, I used the gauge to check the fence alignment either side of the blade. I should have dropped the blade really, but well, I didn't. I did a few checks either side and was getting pretty much the same reading each time. And that is that the front end of the fence is toeing in about 0.2 of a millimetre. That's not even across the whole fence length, so I think it's worth attempting some adjustment to see if I can't reduce that to at most a couple of hundredths. The fence positioners are tightened down, but its bars and fixing plates loosened for adjustment. Again, an unusual table saw fence this. If you want to see more on it, I'll link the video below. Same kind of deal with the blade, making a mark either side to check in the same spots as I go back and forth. I had to re-zero a couple of times as all the fence fixings loose, I was getting some erroneous results. I eventually found a point where the fixings were tight enough to hold, loose enough to allow some micro adjustment. Eventually, after several adjustments, tighten downs and rechecks, I reached a point where I was consistently reading a pointer movement a mere half of 1/100th movement between points. 5/1000ths in other words. I'd say the fence is pretty damn parallel to the slot now. It's a funny one to review this, as it's not a new thing or a game changer, or even a tool that has an everyday use. More like 2 or 3 times a year when you service or tune up after batches of work. In my little workshop, I've always just used combinations of steel rules and squares to set out, and as you can see, I get pretty close. That said, the dial has affirmed the setup and shown me the need to tune up my fence. If the dial indicator does nothing more than reassure you with your setup, it is worth having one. Joinery companies I've worked for over the years have always had them around, so I'm not really sure why it's taken me so long to get hold of one really. How much it helps with the planer, I'll wait until I properly service that, but it's a neat feature that the model I have here is able to be configured to stand on the beds, and it did at least tell me, after some hacking, that the beds are in planar over the cutter mouth. Of course, you can also use these dial indicators to check the rotation of your drills and routing machines, CNCs and lathes and the like. The holes in the mounting bar here offer a number of fixing options made particularly easy for me by my alley profile fence here. A sliding T-nut on one of the provided M5 Allen screws and we're away. A reasonable quality mandrel in the drill or router should give you a good reference. As you turn, you should be able to discern any alignment or drill chuck issues. My drill looks about 0.3 of a millimetre off, so I'll have a look at this soon. In the same vein, I'll be using this dial indicator to service and rebuild my over router on the wall there too. In fact, doing that is actually the reason I requested this dial indicator in the first place from Banggood. So yeah, I think these are handy things to have around, even if it's for a once a year service tune-up I think. And this one seems to provide good mounting options. As you can see, the long metric version here is currently priced at £24 and a penny with £2 odd postage. If you're interested in one, it is worth considering the full set version, which would actually save you a couple of quid. This appears to be metric only, with the mount length somewhere between my long version and the short version at 180mm. If you need the extra length of my one and want to use it for planer beds, worth considering buying the gauge head set for extra reach. Or you could just butcher it like I did. Onto this massive 16-inch triangle square then. This is the box it came in, and although great that it's in a box, it is quite a flimsy box. Mine had all the other gear's boxes taped to it, which added some rigidity, so thankfully arrived flat. But a beefier box would be a good idea, I think. Anyway, I say 16-inch rather than 410mm or whatever it is, as the scale markings are in inches only, no metric option. And the scales are only on its 90-degree sides. The 45-degree side has no markings. Although scale I'm not particularly interested in, as I intend to use this purely as a setting tool, not for measuring and marking. It feels a substantial thing, all machined from 6mm aluminium plate, but as ever with squares of any sort, I set about a couple of checks to see if it actually is square. With the sort of unintentional irony that can often come with products from China, although the triangle is seating absolutely perfectly inside my bench dogs laid out in a triangle on the MFT, I couldn't help but notice they'd spelt precision wrong. Precision. Gave me a chuckle, that. Anyway, I laid the dogs out to test the 90-degree side as well, and again, they align perfectly. You'll notice this has a stock, or lip, at the bottom edge. This is a removable piece. I'm testing it with this on, as I'll be using this back edge of the stock as a reference quite often. The main triangle inside the stock, being CNC machined, is going to be pretty damn accurate. Maybe not to 1,000th at this price point, but certainly to the 100th. Next, the old mark, flip over and mark again test. I recut the edges of this panel on the newly tuned table saw, so pretty happy it's providing a good reference edge. Flipped over, you will notice on the stock there it has 3 mounting screws, which you do have a little adjustment over by loosening the screws and resetting. You can see the lines have perfectly overlaid each other there, no deviation. I'm happy with that. I just do another line either side of that one just to eyeball that they stay parallel, and again, both look fine and dandy to me. So what do you want a massive precision triangle in the workshop for then? Well, it gives you a pretty long 90-degree reference to check panels you've cut, and a long 45 to mark from for that matter. But for me, the main thing was for quick checking my fence and rail on the MFT periodically. This gear is always on the move, being taken on and off, and the bench itself is in heavy use. So before a run of jobs, I like to just check everything. This for me will make check and setup easier, not to mention much quicker. Now I was happy with my setup, but like with the dial gauge earlier, these tools just offer a little reassurance that all is good. Giving such large reference edges, another thing this tool offers of course is something decent to butt a guide rail up to, and this is just as handy on site as in the workshop, giving you of course a 90 and a 45-degree option. Really, this one falls under just a nice to have, and I've kind of been poised to buy a large set out triangle like this one since I built my MFT bench. The problem is, these large ones from brands like Woodpeckers, TSO and our own Bench Dogs tools are kind of prohibitively expensive. You're basically talking between 200 and 350 quid. Useful as they are, that's a lot of money for what they are. This one from Banggood at the minute is listed as £29.62 with £19.06 postage, so call it 50 quid. These had appeared from Chinese sellers at over £100 not so long ago, so for a solid machine triangle giving 16-inch or 410mm reference edges, it's a comparatively good deal I think. Now neither of these are likely essential everyday tools for most, but they'll sure be handy to have around for those dial-in and service days. I'll leave all the relevant links below, and I hope you found a look at these tools insightful in some way. Comments and questions welcome below. Like if you did, sub if you haven't already, and as ever, if you made it this far, thanks for watching.